All right. Well, today's theme, I thought, first of all, welcome to Aquarium Zen. We've been here for 10 years now presenting the aquascaping concept to the community of Seattle. So we're Seattle's own original aquascaping store. So it's been a wonderful journey just sharing this beautiful art form with our community. So it's been a great journey for me. Yeah, for me it is an art form. I consider these living landscape paintings, and I'm always trying to improve my own practice, my own creative expression, and that's kind of why we're here today, to share what I've learned along the journey with you guys, to hopefully inspire you and inform you on your process. So the theme today is going to be maintenance. Maintenance is really I think that is the art form in a lot of ways with the aquascape, because you can set up a beautiful tank on day one, walk away from it, and it'll just kind of degenerate. So it's really that constant effort, that constant attention to detail, the constant dance of working with the elements that are growing, the elements that are declining, and making those decisions moment by moment on how to guide the direction of this aesthetic vision. And so through maintenance, that's kind of how we work, with the aquarium. It's a physical activity. Unlike other art forms, say a painting, where you might find a point of completion, hang it on your wall, this one's ever evolving, constantly changing. And in a lot of natural systems, it's moving towards, like in a lot of natural systems, it's moving towards entropy. So if I were to leave this tank untouched, these plants would grow in. Likely a lot of algae would also show up on the scene. And this beautiful Eden that I've created here will turn into a swamp and get kind of nasty pretty quickly.
Give into the algae overlords.
Give into the algae overlords. Yeah, we're here to battle against our algae overlords and teach them a lesson about beauty. So that's the challenge. It is as beautiful as it is. It's a bit of an illusion, and that illusion comes through my constant attention, my constant activity. Maintenance, of course, is very practical. When I say maintenance, the bare bones of it, I'm draining about a third to half of the volume at least every week with this aquarium. And when I do that, that's when I start to do my detail work with the plants, with the hardscape, with other elements that need attention. So after the tank is drained, that's a very efficient time to start performing other maintenance tasks, because we just have, I just find it easier when there's a little bit of a headspace, there's not so much water, to get in there and trim plants, move things around. That's just my practice. So yeah, once the tank is drained, I will then scrape the glass. We use like a kind of very fine razor that's been designed for aquariums to scrape the glass, almost shaves the algae off the interior of the glass. And so that's part of my process. Then I will start making decisions on trimming. I'll probably have already kind of had it in mind, what I wanted to take out, what I wanted to emphasize prior to starting the maintenance routine. So I'll start trimming the plants. I'll start moving things around. For example, this week I added some moss. For those of you coming to shop pretty frequently, you may have noticed a few changes, like there's a field of moss here, there's a field of moss there. I've also kind of added some layers to the foreground. We have some big Amano shrimp, and they like to rip up the baby tears that I have growing in the foreground, unfortunately. Actually, the angelfish will pick at it too. I've seen them do that, which is unfortunate. And then sometimes they'll teach the tetras that trick, and the tetras will get in on action. This tetra doesn't seem to be as interested in vegetation, but I had another kind of tetra in here, the raccoon tetra. Those are red cherry tetras I'm pointing to. The raccoon tetra, and then they kind of learn from the angels to disrupt the foreground. So that's something, little things like that you can't plan for. You know, there's no book that's going to tell you a raccoon tetra will eat baby tears or YouTube channel. Those are just things you learn on your own as you're working with the aquarium. There's all these kinds of unusual situations that come up that you have to respond to. And again, it's part of your maintenance routine to figure out, like, you know, what's the next step, how you're going to fix that issue, how you're going to, you know, work with it. So little things like that are fun challenges, I find, just kind of charming challenges in a way. A little, you know, that's my biggest problem. Tetra is eating some little plants. It's not that big of a deal, really. It's kind of fun. So so yeah, we drain the tank, we clean the glass, we trim the plants. I've recently picked up a book on ikebana, which is the Japanese style of flower arranging, which I find really informative for this practice. A lot of what you see here came from the Japanese garden tradition. Takashi Amano is kind of the original aquascaper from Japan. Took elements of the Japanese gardening tradition, his own experiences as a landscape photographer, and you know, just his own artistic genius and his love for the aquarium, his lifelong love for freshwater aquariums, and kind of converged all those elements into one form. So that was his genius, just taking all his cultural experience, his you know, his inspiration as a naturalist and photographer, and combining it and putting it into the aquarium, which is something very special. But getting back to the ikebana, I read there's one passage that really inspired me. It said, in ikebana, what you're trying to do is describe the circulation of air with the plant arrangement, which I thought was really fascinating and something we could probably apply to the way we look at maintaining and trimming our aquarium plants. We're trying to describe, outline the flow of water with these plants. If we were to let this aquarium get too dense, it'll stagnate. The water can't flow. It'll get physically blocked. The movement of water get physically blocked by the plant arrangements. So we really are embodying this movement with the way we maintain it, the way we manage it, the way we trim the plants. And so that's something really, something maybe to take home today for your own planted aquariums, because I think that's really essential. Circulation, as I've seen in this tank, when I block the there's a lot of plants in this tank. This is probably my most heavily planted aquarium. When I block that circulation, I start getting algae problems, possibly even health problems with the fish. So that's really an essential element. And what you do find with some of the you know, more advanced aquascapers, they pay a lot of attention to flow in terms of like using very powerful filters. There's a canister filter system down here, also a CO2 rig. There's also a canister filter on the other side of the tank. So this tank is 65 gallons or so and has a few hundred gallons of filtration running on it, and primarily that's for removing fine particles out of the water and circulation. There's a lot of biological activity happening in the aquarium, so it's not so much for establishing a bed of bacteria on the filtration, it's more for removing particles and moving water. So again, that negative space is so essential in the health of these environments, because as the water is moving, it's also dislodging tiny bits of detritus, poop, dust from the soil that we use here. The soil breaks down over time and will start to deposit dust around the aquarium. And those little bits of dust and detritus and poop and whatnot can be trigger points for algae growth. So it's really essential to see some movement in your plants. That's really, I think, an important thing that I'm starting to learn. That lesson is coming through, that message is coming through stronger and stronger every time I do an aquascape. It's like, okay, now I understand, because like Takashi Amano's company, they sell these very powerful canister filters, and they really blast the water. And I'm starting to understand why they're so powerful, because they're really more powerful than anything else on the market. And it's really for that that effect of creating very healthy circulation around these dense plantings, and also the hardscape as well. So I love that idea. We're describing the invisible with our aesthetic choices with the plants. That's such a beautiful concept for me. I'm really inspired by that. And when I'm trimming, I'm often looking for opportunities to emphasize a certain plant, de-emphasize a certain one. I'm just reacting intuitively to a harmony that's coming through in the tank. And that's kind of like my job, you know, in those moments, those maintenance moments. Maintenance for me is a really pleasurable activity. I like to listen to music. I like to zone out, zone in on the aquarium, and forget my troubles for a little bit. It's like my thoughts kind of recede, and I'm focused on one task, which is beautifying my aquarium. That's all I can do in that moment, and everything feels at peace. And that's why you're standing in a space called Aquarium Zen, because I discovered that and thought, wow, people really need to enjoy this for themselves, discover this for themselves, because it really is a healing practice for me. Yeah, any questions? I'm gonna grab my coffee.
What is the bushy green plant that you've got in the foreground that's kind of the primary green mound in the front?
Oh, this guy?
Yeah.
So what's happening here is we have like a little, we have a multi-species effect happening here. There's like 3 or 4 species joining together to create one look. So there's Riccia. Now Riccia is actually a floating plant. It wants to float. It's very buoyant. It's a kind of liverwort. It's a very ancient, simple plant. It likes to float, but when it gets kind of caught into the fabric of another plant's growth, it gets captured by friction, and it looks very interesting. And that was one of Takashi Yamano's genius, is he started using this floating plant in a submerged fashion. No one else was doing that. Because as a child, I helped edit his autobiography shortly after he died, and I helped his daughter with that. And as a child, he used to snorkel in a freshwater marsh near his house, and that marsh got destroyed for development. That kind of triggered his interest in environmentalism. But so he was, as a kid, he'd just splash around playing, catching minnows and tadpoles, and observing the plants and animals in this marsh. And that's where he got a lot of his ideas for the planted aquarium that no one else had ever thought of or done, like using shrimps as cleaners for plants, came from those explorations as a kid. They eventually named the cleaner shrimp the Amano shrimp after him. So Riccia was one of those just natural kind of observations that he incorporated into the aquarium. And so what he started doing was tying the Riccia down to stones or pieces of wood with like a thin monofilament, and that would hold it in place as it grew into like this pillow. It would cover its bindings, and then it would stay underwater for a while, and eventually it kind of floats away. But it will also integrate into other species, you know, kind of there again, like by friction, and that's what you're seeing here. There's pearlweed, there's Riccia. Honestly, there's also some algae, which is helping kind of knit it all together. This is Limnophila belem. So we have like a community of at least 3 or 4 species creating one single aesthetic effect and biological effect, because they're kind of supporting each other too. They're creating structure, they're creating maybe some defense from grazing organisms. I don't know, there's a whole little community happening here. The other beauty of working with Riccia underwater, as Takashi Yamano discovered, is that it will what's called pearl. So as it completes its sort of photosynthetic activity for the day, it'll start to respire oxygen bubbles. and the oxygen will form in relatively large bubbles on each frond of Riccia and just dot this whole surface with little silver bubbles, and it's very charming. And it's a transient effect that only lasts for a couple hours. It starts in the afternoon. So if you come back here around 4 or 5, you might notice some little silver bubbles of oxygen intermixed in this little mass here with the Riccia. And then they just start off-gassing, leaving, and then they kind of disappear for the day. So it's this beautiful transient display of oxygen. And he would, we have a bunch of his books around the store you could check out after the talk. But he would like emphasize that effect and do these wonderful lines of Riccia that were tied to wood, and then they're all like these little silver fairy gardens, with all the bubbles forming on the Riccia. So he would like actually work with that. I've tried doing that. It's really hard to work with Riccia because every little frond wants to float away. So over time it kind of makes a mess. But often what I do is I start with an idea like that, like Takashi Amano's idea of tying all this Riccia to wood. It may or may not work for me, but maybe some will hang on, integrate itself into this mass like here, and then that'll work for my aquarium. When I first started this aquarium, I was like, yeah, I want to do the Riccia thing. This is going to be my Riccia tank. And I had Riccia attached to all these logs and everything in here. And over time, it just didn't come off like his tanks. My tanks never look like his. And that's my constant challenge to myself. Can I someday get to that point where, I'm at that level? And that's the joy of an art form, is you can always keep evolving and moving, higher and higher in your skills and artistry. So it didn't really come off it didn't have the presentation like I'd hoped, like I had envisioned, and I kind of started to not emphasize the Riccia over time, changed up the hardscape. Hardscape was very simple, became very simple, just some stones, no longer the wood. The Riccia coated wood was removed, and I just left a few patches of Riccia that was just naturally in the tank. And so it colonized wherever it wanted, and I've left it there now. But yeah, that's a great question. I love Riccia and that whole story with Amano and his origins. It's a fun one. Any other questions so far? Yes.
How do you install moss like that, or like how it's on the wood?
Yeah. So mosses are interesting. There are a lot of types of aquatic mosses that we can use in the aquarium. Not all of them, actually, the minority of them will attach themselves to hardscape. So again, going back to the master Takashi Amano, he uses a moss called Taxophyllum barbieri for his designs. The translation in his books, it's called willow moss. It doesn't seem to have a common, there's not a consensus on a common name for that plant. Often in the aquarium hobby, people will attach a common name to a fish or plant or something, and then it'll get common use, and that just becomes the name. But for that plant, it just hasn't established. There's no organizing body that comes up with these names and makes them a standard or anything. It's just like through evolution, through the culture, they get names. So that one doesn't really have a great name yet, but it's Taxophyllum barbieri. Some people have called it Java moss. It's not Java moss. It grows as easily as Java moss, but it has a much finer, delicate frond structure than Java moss, and that one attaches well to the hardscape. So when you look at Takashi Amano's aquascapes, which I encourage you to do, you'll see he uses that moss over and over. And actually the clone that I'm using in my tanks came out of his nature aquarium galley I got many years ago from a friend who went to Japan and smuggled back a few. I shouldn't say smuggled, but came back. He was gifted by the aquarium gods some moss, and I've been growing it ever since. It's also available in tissue culture here. We always have it available. So that one, what you do is you take little fronds. To get back to your original question, you take little fronds of the moss and you will tie it to like the wood or the stone.
What do you tie it with?
So again, Amano in his genius came up with the kind of thread that dissolves after a couple months. So it's just a cotton thread, but just has the right thread count, right type of cotton. That because some threads you try, they'll dissolve in a few days, and this one will dissolve in about 2 months. And at that point, it leaves the moss behind. It's called moss cotton. It leaves the moss behind, and there's no trace of the binding anymore. You can glue moss with the gel form of super glue. That works too. Super glue was
That's not toxic?
super glue, from what I understand, was originally developed as a suture for skin. So it's not really toxic. It's very commonly used in the aquascaping world. You're probably going to get used to that feel of glue, super glue drying on your fingertips if you become an aquascaper. So yeah, so super glue is really a good tool. I don't love it for moss because it just depends, but it leaves like a little white scab behind, and I know it's there even if the moss cover. For me, I like these are really idealistic landscapes for me, and the idea of like there being some weird toxic glue crud in my aquarium, I just don't like that. I don't use plastic in my aquariums, nothing. It's just nature. It's just wood, stone. Some people will use like egg crate to support their hardscape, or foam or whatever. I don't do any of that stuff. I just want a purely natural aquarium. That's just my style, and that's what I learned from Takashi Amano. He doesn't use any plastic, doesn't use any glue. It's just wood, stone, water, fish, plants, dirt, just essential elements from nature. I thought I saw a hand in the back. Yes.
Yeah. When you say hardscape, are you referring to like wood, rocks?
Yeah, that's a good question. Sorry. Yeah, if there's anything that's unclear, please, allow me to clarify. Hardscape just refers to these permanent elements in the aquarium that don't change. So the wood and stone primarily are going to be our hardscape elements. If you were to have like a clay dinosaur or something, that would be your hardscape as well. But again, in the nature aquarium, we're just using wood and stone primarily as our hardscape elements. So the beauty of the hardscape is it gives permanence to the design. Whereas all the elements, the fish are moving, they're never in the same place at the same, once, twice. And then the plants are always growing from day to day too. So everything's in flux in these environments, but the hardscape is static and it's grounding, grounds the whole vision. And it's a very important thing. So when you're starting an aquarium, you might want to spend extra time with the hardscape. Some people, that's their whole practice is hardscape. I know several aquascapers who don't even fill their tank with water. They don't plant. They're just rearranging hardscape all the time. I met a guy in Hawaii, that's all he does. He doesn't even use aquarium anymore. He has like a cutout kind of box, and he just makes these incredible hardscapes. He sells them too, because it's actually quite hard to do a beautiful hardscape. It's a whole nother. We have a customer comes in, his name is Aaron, and he'll come to the dojo, hardscape dojo, and like set up these magical arrangements and then just like leave, and you're like, how did he do that? So it's another kind of talent, and that's the beauty of this art form, maybe any art forms. You discover talents that you didn't even have, So I don't think he really knew he was a hardscape master till he came in here, and it just flows through him intuitively. So there's all these elements maybe that you can discover about yourself through these aquariums. He is like really good at working with rock. I love working with plants. I also love the fish. There's just all, maybe you're into shrimp. There's just all these little things that you will you will encounter about yourself that you didn't know before. So it is a wonderful tool for self-discovery.
Do you have shrimp in that tank?
There are a few shrimp in this tank, not a lot, but there are a few. We're using the Amano shrimp, the algae-eating shrimp in this aquarium. There are probably about close to a dozen. You may not see any because it's so densely planted. Sometimes they're all out. But I like to use the Amano shrimp where I can. They're very effective algae eaters. I probably would use more Amano shrimp in this tank, but I'm also trying to breed the red cherry tetra, and the shrimp will eat their eggs. So those are those kinds of decisions you make with your aquarium, what to emphasize. In this case, I wanted to make sure there were enough shrimp that they're doing some algae control, but not too much that they would eat all the fish eggs. So that was another part of my design choices. And that's the beauty of this art form, is that you're constantly, forced to make little fun decisions like that, like how many shrimp to add to your tank. We don't want the shrimp to eat all the fish eggs and blah blah. So there's a constant dance, constant readout, constant information that's coming from this. I consider these like a superorganism. There's many species here, but they're all part of this one world, and it's just like a unified field of living energy for me. And it's constantly it's communicating with you, where to go next, what's working, what's not working, what to add. And then you develop this sensitivity, and it starts growing. The two of you start growing together. It's very fun. At first, you're kind of blind to what it's telling you, and it may get covered in algae, and then that's why you come to us, and we help you interpret, the sort of what it's telling you about your practice, about your maintenance. It often comes down to maintenance. Yes.